Don't say mean things about them.
Don't say, I won't say mean things about anybody.
So many rules.
Well, that's kind of ironic, because yes, quite often there are so many rules, which tends to be one of the biggest obstacles.
See, nice segue, awesome.
Uh-huh. See what I did there?
Alrighty. Now I'm in camera view. Alrighty, hi everybody. Welcome into the Schaumburg Library. My name is Chris. I am your adult programs coordinator here at the library. And welcome to another program journey on the road to level up at your library. If you have no idea what that is our summer reading challenge. If you're like, oh gosh, summer's almost over, don't worry, you can absolutely still sign up for it. Someone at one of our desks is more than happy to help you, and you can backlog all the reading you've probably already done. All we ask is you do 40 days of reading, and then you win a prize. Adults win a notebook. Our younger friends win a free book. Our librarians have picked really wonderful books. You just go to the teen space or the youth space, whatever your age range is, and you get to pick a book for yourself. Now I want to get things going. You guys are here to learn about D&D, not about reading challenges. I'm just contractually obligated to excite you about the reading challenges. If you are in person and you need a washroom, the washrooms are located straight out that backmost door. Any of these doors will take you there. That's just the fastest. The ladies is the first door on your left. Further down that hallway is going to be the gentleman's room, and then in between those is a water fountain. If you are at home, I hope you know where your restroom and water source are, but if you're at home and you have questions for the speaker, you can use the Q&A, and we'll take those questions at the end. You'll also notice closed captions have been enabled for your convenience. In-person audience, if you have a question, I'm assuming this is going to be a little bit more conversational based off of what you were saying.
I think so, yeah.
In that case, I'm going to rely on you, Jason, because the at-home audience is going to need to hear it, to repeat a little bit of the question into your mic so that they can hear it. But yeah, we'll kind of be a little informal because Dungeons & Dragons and any tabletop RPG is a conversation. Without further ado, I want to introduce you to who is really, I'm going to say, a jack of all trades, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is actually I believe it's a ability in Dungeons & Dragons. I think a bard can take jack of all trades or something. There's something in the back of my head.
Probably. I think there's probably a rule for everything, yeah.
But our speaker, Jason Dean, is a teacher. He runs a major steampunk convention in the area, and for the past little while, he's actually been helping the teens here at the Schaumburg Library learn how to play tabletop role-playing games. So who better than to help our adult and some of our young audience as well learn a little bit more about how you could run a game of your own. Everyone, please welcome Jason Dean.
All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, Chris. Thank you kindly. So hello to the people who are here today, and hello to the people who are at home. Yes, I am Jason Dean, and as Chris mentioned, for the last few months, also been running Dungeons & Dragons for the teen program here. I also run the D&D club at the middle school where I teach. I have been playing it since I was also a middle schooler, which was some time ago, back when Dungeons & Dragons was only actually 10 years old at that point. Last year it celebrated its 50th anniversary. So yeah, been around for a while. So yes, it's been very much part of my life, and I got to talk to some of you when you first came in, and so far the story seems to be, I really want to play, but I don't know how to get started. So I'm curious as to those who came in afterwards. Have you played?
Yeah, very little.
Okay, very little.
With all other news.
Yeah.
Okay, and what about these two young men? Have you played Dungeons & Dragons?
I have DM'd once, but it turned out to be a disaster because I was like given a heads up 2 hours earlier. I procrastinated, so I made it 15 minutes before it started, and it only lasted about 30 minutes.
Oh, but the great news is you did do it and you tried, and it sounds like you haven't been scared off. Just, yeah, don't be scared off. So, by the way, yes, Dungeons & Dragons, also, as Chris mentioned, tabletop role-playing games. These days, 51 years later, Dungeons & Dragons does seem to have become kind of synonymous with role-playing game, just in the same way, various products where the brand name has also become synonymous with whatever the item is. Dungeons & Dragons is kind of that way. In fact, oh gosh, I forget now where I heard this one, but refer to D&D, there's kind of like two Dungeons and Dragons. There is Dungeons and Dragons, the brand product, which is currently owned by Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro and so forth. And then there is Dungeons and Dragons as the folk tradition, the 51-year-old folk tradition. And so then, yeah, they can be sort of used inter-exchange. So I'm going to get more from you as we go through as to what your experiences are, what you're hoping to get out of this, and hopefully I can give you some tips on how to get started and so forth, and just share with you things that work for me, because that is actually what most of my knowledge is going to be qualified by, is just, yeah, it worked for me. That little rule in the back of the book and everything else, or that supplement, I might not necessarily know that. In fact, I probably don't know that. But what worked for me, hopefully it works for you. I can share that as well. So yes, we're going to talk about D&D, role-playing games. And I got to remember now what was on my slides. Oh, okay, no, that was just kind of a list. Ah, yes, theater of the mind. So you have played, you want to play, you've had a little bit. So tabletop role-playing games. Oh, sorry, Chris, yeah, I moved around quite a bit. Imagination is certainly, it is a shared hallucination is really what it is. Everyone's around the table, or these days possibly connected, via online platforms or Zoom or whatever it is. But what is happening is this shared hallucination, the imagination. So if you haven't played before, when you just sort of picture in your mind's eye, we are going to turn you into a character. Perhaps you're a spellcaster, and you're wearing robes. Perhaps you're a warrior, you've got armor on. But what you do have in your hand is a burning torch, the flames flickering as you found your way into this abandoned tomb. It smells musty, it's dark, shadows are flickering around. You don't know quite what is in the shadows. You take a moment to stand still and listen. At this point, your dungeon master might say, roll a dice, and you're going to find out whether or not you heard that thing that is lurking. In fact, you did. You heard something. There is something just outside the room. What do you decide to do? I know you're thinking about what you're going to do, and you probably declare what you're going to do, and you sort of, there you go. You were just doing it. You were using your imagination, that shared hallucination that we're all picturing being in there.
No divergence. No divergence.
No divergence? Oh, neurodivergence. I hear what you're saying. Yes, it's the best. I recommend it. Whatever your neurospicy is, let's add it to the spice rack. So yes, theater of mind is a huge part. I mean, there are different ways to play it, but at the end of the day, it is a collective storytelling. If you do any theater and you do improv, there's an improvisation element about it. Some of it is scripted. Some of it is going to turn on what the dice determines, and then you just kind of improvise the next bit. And we did start off with so you wanted to run Dungeons and Dragons, and that can be sort of quite intimidating as well. Usually considered to be a lot of work and so forth, and sometimes kind of possibly the player who gets shortchanged at the table because you're the one organizing it. But hopefully by the end of this evening, I'm going to point out that being the dungeon master or the games master can be just as fun as well, because you don't know what's going to happen as well. So it's in the same way the players are improvising, the person running the game can also be improvising. And we'll talk a bit about this later, about how the value in actually not over planning. Just kind of leave yourself open for a number of things. So yeah, terms. These days, most of these terms are quite commonly known. The Dungeon Master, DM, which actually I believe is specifically a copyrighted term for Wizards of the Coast. So that is why DM is actually just for Dungeons & Dragons specific. But Games Master is also a term that is used in general for others. If it's Call of Cthulhu, the term is Keeper. Various game systems might have a different term, but yeah, GM tends to be the main one. PCs, player characters. A lot of people also know this commonly from video games these days. Actually, video games has taken on a lot of the language that was developed in the 1970s by Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games. So we have non-player characters, which I think has become more of a common term. I think you see that creeping up in movies as well, even if it's nothing necessarily specific about gaming. Dice. Oh, there's so much dice. So, okay, quick show of hands. How many people in the room already have a set of dice? Exactly. All right, who's got several sets of dice? All right, my fellow dice goblins. Yes, because once you start getting the dice, it can be turned into quite an addictive thing, and you always need more and more dice. Also, when you're playing, I mentioned at the beginning as well, theater of the mind, the idea that so much of this takes place in your imagination, collectively telling a story and so forth. But it is possible also to have pieces on the board. Miniatures are always kind of fun, but they're not necessarily, you don't have to have them. And terrain, I know a lot of people who build fantastic castles and all sorts of things, but you can do it without, completely without. As we experienced just a moment ago, just pure imagination can do it as well. So yes, actually you probably might recognize some of these characters on the screen. Certainly, it's kind of weird to think that season 1 of Stranger Things was 10 years ago, 2015 when it first came out, and was hugely responsible for a kind of resurgence in Dungeons and Dragons. I will confess myself, I said I started playing when I was a teenager. Well, in my 20s and 30s, I was too cool for that stuff. And then Stranger Things, and I'm like, yeah, I miss that, I really do. And so then I started getting back into that. That also combined with the pandemic, that was something else that the Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games truly spiked in that. All right. There we go. So I mentioned the dice. Actually, this is the set that I recently purchased over here. So many different sizes. Now, over here are your typical amount of sizes. Now, I know that everybody who's actually here said you have some dice, so you're already familiar with these. But for those at home who might not be, well, quite a variety here, including, I don't know, how many folks here got a D100? So yeah, this thing here, which is the size of a golf ball and rolls like a golf ball as well, but it actually has 100 sides. Now, for those new to it as well, D followed by the number is kind of how we refer to the different dice. So a regular 6-sided die is a D6, we've got D12s, over here is a D60 even, but these are the ones that are most commonly used in the game. And for those in here, I'm going to guess you're familiar with the D20, but anybody at home who might not be familiar, the one at the very top, which has 20 sides, is the most commonly used of the dice when playing Dungeons & Dragons and various other role-playing games. Not all of them, but like I said, that is the one that's most typical. And that is used often to determine whether something has been successful or not successful. The player describes what they want to do, the dice are rolled, the numbers are checked, and either it did happen or it didn't happen, or varying degrees of it, and so forth. And then, yeah, the games master, usually responsible then for describing that success or failure. However, and I guess this kind of comes where, me just sharing what works. Because it is a collective storytelling, and I'm guessing most of this audience are prospective dungeon masters, sharing that responsibility as much as possible is a good move. So having people have the opportunity to describe, especially if they've rolled a victory, or have them describe what it is that, and go into great detail and then roll the dice to find out whether that happened or not. Try and involve, the rest of the table as much as possible. It makes it a more enjoyable experience for everybody. And also, as a dungeon master, games master, it takes a huge amount off your shoulders. You are not necessarily supposed to be the entertainer who is, amusing a table full of people. You are there as the facilitator, and everybody at the table is involved in the game as well. So they will be more engaged, and there'll be less work on your shoulders. And plus, collectively, we tend to come up with more things than just one brain can imagine. So it's amazing, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment as well. So yes, the dice. The dice that actually originally started off in the early 70s as math dice. These were available as educational tools. And then the inventors of Dungeons and Dragons took these dice, started using them, and now, well, you don't really see these in the classroom anymore, but certainly you see them in gaming places. So yes, a little bit of a history lesson then. So 1974 is when Dungeons and Dragons officially begins. And not too far away from here. I'm going to guess there's probably a bunch of people in the room familiar that, yes, Lake Geneva in Wisconsin, that's where Dungeons and Dragons was born. They had a really good festival last year as well called Dragon Days to celebrate the 50th anniversary. So yes, here we go, the inventors of it. Gary Gygax, pictured there on the right, tends to get a lot of credit for inventing Dungeons and Dragons, and certainly he was a driving force. But Dave Arneson was also a picture on the left, put together the game, they worked together on this. And here on the left are pictures of the original books. They were kind of put almost like homemade, very low budget and so forth. And yeah, 1973, so I was older than myself. Dave Arneson actually ends up moving to Lake Geneva as well as the company starts building. And unfortunately, in a sort of rock and roll success and then not, the two of them end up having a bit of a split over the rights as to who actually invented it. And this is when we end up seeing advanced Dungeons and Dragons coming out, so that you had two versions of Dungeons and Dragons existing at the same time. Here we go with, yes, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. First appearing in 1977, and then, yeah, over the 3 years, the different books coming out. But yeah, this is kind of more akin to the Dungeons and Dragons that we know today. But 1977. And I regret, I actually had copies of the originals at one time. Oh. Sorry, this remote control is a bit, there we go. So as I mentioned, yes, it splits. And then there is also what's known as BX BECME. Actually, BECME is where I got in. So Christmas 1984, I got a copy of the red book here. And that's where it all got started for me. And pretty much the same game. Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, as the title implies, it looks closer to what people know of Dungeons & Dragons now. This was actually a much more sort of streamlined version. But like I said, the fact that they both existed at the same time. And the artwork is fantastic. I don't know if you're familiar with Larry Elmore. He did a lot of the artwork on these. So yes, the game advances. So there we have, yes, the original version over there, 3rd edition, 4th edition, 2nd edition. Currently, the game is on its 5.5, not 6 edition. It doesn't actually have a specific name, but it was the 50th anniversary version or something, which is basically the same as 5th edition, which came out in 2015. And that is perhaps been the most successful version of Dungeons & Dragons. And actually, as we continue on, one of the things I will be talking about is, even though Dungeons & Dragons, role-playing game, tabletop, and everything else, love it, the actual system itself might not necessarily be well, in my opinion, the best. And so I'm going to talk about some other role-playing games as well. But this is certainly the most widely played, the most popular. And, well, actually, this would be kind of relevant. Finding dungeon masters, finding people to run the game has actually been a bit of a problem, because as the game has grown and grown and the number of rules have grown and grown, the dungeon master having sort of supposedly that responsibility to keep 50 years worth of rules in one head can prove to be rather stressful. So that's why actually several other games, people have sort of gravitated to other ones, and we're sort of seeing a renaissance in some of the other games too. And here are a few examples of other games. And this is just sort of the tip of the iceberg. So yes, there is Dungeons & Dragons. A lot of people know about Dungeons & Dragons. That one is widely known. Other ones, Old School Essentials, Shadow Dark has been incredibly successful lately. This is kind of seen as a bit of a successor to Dungeons & Dragons. This plays pretty much in the same way. Tales of the Valiant is one that's sort of split off too. The one, however, that I am running here with the teen program is Bane. This is actually a Swedish sort of Dungeons & Dragons that has been around almost as long as the regular Dungeons & Dragons. What happened was back in the 80s, it was a small publishing company. They didn't have the game in Swedish, and so some nerds in Sweden just sort of came up with their own version of it and some variations on it. And then that, actually originally it was whatever the Swedish was for Dragons and Demons, I think it's what it translates as. But then last couple of years it has been translated into English and is now available over here as Bane. Sort of very similar to the game, again, a D20, but instead of having to roll high, you actually have to roll low, because you have various skills and so forth, and you want it to match the skill number or under. Now, because we're looking at this kind of from a DM perspective, I have to say it's a lot easier as a dungeon master to run this game, because instead of having to come up with the numbers and target numbers that the players are supposed to roll, it's just right there on their sheet. They want to hit something, it's like, okay, well, what's your sword skill? It's a 13. Okay, roll a 13 or lower. You succeeded, yay. So that does take a huge amount off. So my personal preference, skills-based games make it a lot easier for you as a dungeon master, because, like I said, that information is just there. It's like, what do I need? Well, you tell me. Also, well, these are just so fantasy games like Dungeons & Dragons. There are so many other games out there. Actually, the one that's been around almost as long as Dungeons & Dragons, anybody familiar with Call of Cthulhu? So based on the writings of H.P. Lovecraft, American horror writer from the 1920s, about cosmic horror, when you find out how insignificant you are in the grand universe, etc. The role-playing game came out, in the 1970s, and the primary one is set in the 1920s. And so it's got this sort of detective noir, horror investigation, and so forth. That is a great game. Pretty much anything you can think of, there is now a tabletop role-playing game for that. A lot of film franchises too, there'll be different role-playing games for that. So people who, and I'm sure probably some of your friends too, encourage, it's like, look beyond Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons is great, but like there's so much more out there as well, so much more for you to discover. So yeah, the character sheets. This is me getting back to Bane. So I'm going to guess a lot of people have seen this one, although, sorry, that's kind of a bit blurry. So this is your classic 2015 Dungeons & Dragons character sheet. Sometimes can take about an hour to fill it out, which is kind of intimidating, whereas some other games, it would be a lot faster. I mentioned Shadow Dark earlier, which was kind of a sort of much more straightforward, simplified version of Dungeons and Dragons. But one of the reasons it's been so successful is because it really captures that like mid-80s, but the more sort of simple version. That's the character sheet back there. And then Bane, like I said, my favorite one there, which is mostly skills-based. So like if you see in the center, there's all the different skills, and there's going to be a number, and you want to roll equal to or lower than that, and as your character gets better, those numbers will go up, so therefore your chances of success are increasing. But yes, various. Well, actually, let's just pause for a moment then. So I've mentioned about various other role-playing games, and everyone's familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, but which other games have you encountered?
We're playing Starfinder right now,
Okay.
the sci-fi version.
Yes, from Pathfinder, the other version. Kind of similar thing though, isn't it? The 6 main stats and
Yes.
roll high. And
Very similar to what we're playing now. It's just, it's set, you have guns instead of lots of swords and stuff. Set in, outer worlds at this point, so. But it's fun, it's something different, actually.
Fantastic, yeah. All right.
A lot of Baldur's Gate, which is Dungeons and Dragons, so.
Oh, the video game?
Yes.
Right. All right. Anyone else? Different?
Pretty much just Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay. All right. But somewhere out there, they do exist. You've heard of them. And like. So, yes, sharing what worked with me as being a dungeon master. Now, I don't want this to sound like I'm just sort of bad-mouthing regular Dungeons and Dragons. But the Dungeon Master Guide is not necessarily the best especially for a new dungeon master. Now, there's certainly a lot of information in there, statistics and things like that you need to know. But when you first open this book, it's all about like building a universe, which, well, that's quite intimidating. To like, well, I just want to run the game for my friends, to, no, here's chapters on how to be a god, So it's kind of feeling a bit like that Ghostbusters moment, like when Dungeons and Dragons ask you if you're a god, you say yes. But still, that is quite intimidating. However, a book that I highly recommend, and I have got, learned, I thought I knew a lot, but I've learned quite a bit, is just simply this book here. So you want to be a games master, with a lot of tips about also storytelling, how well to organize a table, and various other tips about pacing and so forth, which are very far more useful than a lot of what you're going to get in the regular book as well. So I wonder if the library has a copy of this.
I think we do, actually.
Oh yeah, please. Yeah, no, you go for it. But yeah, that one has been proving to be a really good one. It's been very popular and very well received. Aha, so now we're getting down to the nitty-gritty. I don't know, has anybody seen this meme before? This is so true. In fact, I just experienced this yesterday. I was supposed to be having a game. It's called Vasen. It's a Nordic folklore horror detective game. I was all excited, and then I had 2 people cancel. Because yes, definitely as an adult. Now, for the teens in the room, when you're still in school, that is the most optimal time to get D&D games together. Because later, when you grow up and everyone's got conflicting schedules, then the real challenge of D&D, the real success of D&D is, did you manage to get the game together? And did it run for maybe like 5 sessions or something like that? The longer you can get it to run, that is truly the mark of winning at D&D. And actually the discussions that we were having earlier at the beginning, where you were sort of, trying to find people, and then you were also, and you were talking about, but setting up a game possibly for your kids, which that is a great way too, because at least you're all under the same house, and plus, tabletop gaming is such a great opportunity for family bonding. I've run games for my kids as well, and I love it. And any opportunity, I mean, they're now 22 and 20, and I still love playing with them. And they also are lifelong gamers as well. So yeah, family is good, because that's kind of a built-in. But as far as meeting others, well, there are various online, and certainly in the last 5-10 years, I mean, a whole industry has popped up of, professional DMs who will host on servers and so forth. Local gaming stores are a great way to find games to sign up for, and I believe that libraries are a good place. I mean, certainly a group, somebody wanted to start running a game, booking a room and just sort of setting up. Am I correct in thinking that's a possibility? Yeah. Because in some ways, definitely, if somebody is willing to run a game, there are plenty of players out there who are very willing to play. And I mean, that's one of the big things we are talking about this evening, though, is that sort of intimidation of running the game. And to go back to 50 years of rules, that probably is the biggest stumbling block for a lot of people, is feeling like they have to have mastered all the rules. And a lot of people will tell you that no, you don't have to, not at all. In fact, maybe for the people who've been playing for a long time, part of the reason it was more accessible back then is because, there did seem to be less rules, or at least perhaps even less reverence for the rules. You may have heard the phrase ruling rather than rules. So like, as the person running the game, making a call on the fly is perfectly okay. You're not in a court of law. This is not going to be some sort of, crisis if you say it wrong. Usually what's most important at that time is, for somebody to make the call and for the game to just keep on going. Because everyone's having fun, and as soon as you stop to look up in books and look up things, then the pace is gone. And while yes, that person may have been right, but considering that the main objective is it's a game and it is to have fun, so as a game master, feel confident, and you know what? If somebody else feels that they could do a better job, then by all means, that'd be great. You could be a player at their table. The fact that you are willing to run the game brings you a huge amount of, what's the word I'm looking for? Credence? Yeah. Credit, whatever. You are willing to run the game. So that carries a lot of weight. And, if somebody's going to be kind of grumpy about it, well, maybe you don't want them at your table in the first place. But so once you can accept that and get over that you don't have to know all the rules, suddenly that is a huge weight taken off your shoulders. And other things too as well. Collectively, we were sort of saying about sharing some of the descriptions and imagination. Also, there are other things where you can share that responsibility. It doesn't have to be one person that is responsible for everything. I guess delegation might be a good thing. So, for example, small things. My tables, keeping track of how much damage has been done to monsters. Well, I give a dry erase pen and something to write on to the players. They keep track of how many. I know how many, at that point, the creature is going to be dead and so forth. But as far as doing the math, well, I make them do it. And so these are just little things you can do which help take that off of your shoulders. Because like I said, I think the theme for this evening is like how to make it less intimidating. All right, so you've got a group of people who are interested, you've got them together, and then usually what is referred to, and actually there is some debate about whether or not to have what's called session 0. Because session zero typically is when the group of people have got together and you're going to make your characters and you're going to set up some of your expectations, or, if you want to check in on things, that's the opportunity to do it. It's kind of you're coming up with your house rules, if you will. But sometimes, and here's where the debate is on this. This can be quite a dry session. Now, for some people, it's very necessary. And, you'll know your table, you'll know the people you're playing with, whether this will work or not. But then there's also the argument of like, well, just jump in. And sometimes, especially if you're getting started, maybe starting off with pre-generated characters might be a good idea. Because then that way, you just jump straight into the story. You jump straight into the movie. If not, it would be like, going to see a film, but having to read the script before you could actually just sit and you just wanted to watch the film. This is, I think, a good way for new players, having your pre-generated characters. So everyone just gets handed a character, you get started. If you go and play at a gaming convention or a gaming store, it's quite possible the person running the game will have pre-generated characters. That when I'm running at a convention, I will have characters just to hand out to people. But if not, like I said, session zero, that is when you're determining your characters. And if everybody's really into it and then there's the enthusiasm to carry it, then that's great. But like I said, if you've got people who are just kind of testing the waters, probably pre-generated characters is where you want to go with this. And then later, they can make their own character afterwards if they're really into it. But if you're trying to convince somebody like, yeah, Dungeons & Dragons is amazing, and then you spend 2 hours essentially like filing taxes, then they're probably going to be like, yeah, okay, yeah, this is not really like Stranger Things, is it? All right. So something I have really found works for me, especially because most of the games I run these days are for middle schoolers. And I am a teacher, so there's a certain degree of classroom management that comes into it. But the expression, follow the story, that is actually my number one rule. And this works with teenagers, this also works with adults as well, because keeping people's focus. Now, that's another thing that is kind of intimidating as a dungeon master, is there is a certain herding kittens aspect that will be involved in this. And what I do to keep the focus, but in a kind of non-confrontational way, is just the expression, follow the story. So the students that I run the games for, who are like they're middle schoolers, they're all over the place. But to bring them back in, I just simply, hey, follow the story. And then especially because when it's somebody's turn, they have the story. So when we're following the story, we're like, okay, we're following the story, and it's, it's your turn.
How do we stop the player from rolling an nat 20 and imploding the castle where we're supposed to save or kill the BBG?
Well, it's interesting because the nat 20, I think, has become very overpowered in people's minds. Nat 20 is not like you've been granted a wish spell to do anything that you want. So, things that are within reason. And actually, you know what I'd probably be tempted to do? They describe the castle imploding and everything else, and it's, and then you wake up and find the castle is still there. Or, like, yes, this is what you imagined was going to happen, but then it's still there. Okay, what are you going to do now? And just to kind of let them have their moment and then move on. Because, yes, I actually have a player in particular who, he's graduated off to high school now, but whenever he would roll high, his things, outrageous things that he would describe, and then just kind of let him have that moment and be like, yeah, but that didn't really happen. Because yes, unfortunately, there will be some players who kind of, enjoy derailing things. And that's one where, maybe getting a little bit sterner, of politely pointing out to them of like, hey, you're having a great time, but what about everybody else at the table? How's everyone else doing with this? How's the story working for them? And then kind of bringing it back to the story. And so I found that this has really worked for me because, we're at the table to create a story that has never existed before. And even if you're using pre-published materials with all these various outcomes that may happen, the fact that, as with your player there and other players, there is such a chaotic element. Like, not only have you got like half a dozen neurospicy, chaotic people around a table, the dice as well. So no matter, what crazy things you may have come up with, the dice may come up with something entirely different. Yeah, that huge epic thing you were planning on doing, and then you rolled a 1. And so there's, in Dungeons and Dragons, that would be an epic fail. Now in Dragon Bane, that would be fantastic. Which, by the way, something as simple as, yes, rolling high and rolling low, sometimes you can kind of forget and sort of switching on that one. Because, yes, I've played games where, we've been playing Dragon Bane, someone rolled a 20, and they're like, yay, oh, and they had to remember that, no, that didn't apply. But yes, back to the story, following the story. This is, like I said, this works with teens, this works younger than that, and also with adults, because, we get very distracted as well. That's the other thing too, technology. Quite often, there's a table etiquette of, put away your electronic devices. And it gets back to, well, come on, we need to follow the story. If you're on your phone, you're not following the story. And also another reason why to follow the story is it keeps the pace going well. Because one of the worst things that happen is when people are distracted at the table, and then it comes to their turn, and then they want a briefing on everything that's just happened. And it's like, because they were not following the story, then yeah, they want to recap. And so, like I say, follow the story. That's my strongest bit of advice. Okay. Other advice too, and actually any good Dungeon Master advice you get, and actually I should recommend some YouTube videos in a moment as well. Talk about the more you can take off your plate. So as the Dungeon Master, the Games Master, the more you can take off your plate, it's going to make it easier for you. It's actually going to make it more engaging for everyone else at the table. And so you don't have to come up with everything. I think there's also this misconception that the Games Master knows every single possibility. It's like Doctor Strange, remember when he was looking at every infinite possibility, there's this expectation that you need to be like that. No. Now, my recommendation is have a good poker face to act like you do. But you don't have to, because your players also are going to come up with things you never thought of. But if you act like you had thought of it, then yeah, you get to kind of keep that face and everything else. But so most of the time in the games, you don't have to know every single solution, every single outcome. But what you are doing as the Dungeon Master, the Games Master, and with the published adventure or something you've made up yourself, is, yeah, you're just putting obstacles in front of the players. Now, these obstacles vary as to what they are, but it's not your job to solve them. You just put the trap, you just put the rubble, whatever it is, they've got to figure out how they're going to solve this. And sometimes they're going to come up with solutions that are fantastic. And yeah, if you keep cool about it, you can act like, I knew you were going to do that. So again, that's kind of sharing the responsibility, but without necessarily, being obvious about it. So, anybody familiar with the 5-room dungeon? This, a few years back, I forget who came up with it, but You will find quite a few examples of this on the internet, sometimes maps of it. It doesn't literally have to be a 5-room dungeon, but this was something that was developed as a neat way of putting adventures together. And sometimes, yeah, this can be actually more metaphorical speaking, but having sort of 5 elements of sort of the game and the story. So like these obstacles that I said you're putting in front of them. And yeah, basically it's, well, I'm reluctant to use the term formula, but it's a pretty good formula for throwing together engaging adventures for the players. So, and in many ways, it kind of reminds me of sort of a Joseph Campbell hero quest in a way. Not hero quest, that's a game, hero's journey. So yes, at the beginning, some sort of a guardian at the entrance, like an initial battle, you know, so you get to roll some dice, you get to kind of get the adrenaline going a little bit to get things started. You know, it's like the action sequence at the beginning of the movie, and then we're into the main story. Then something that requires maybe a little bit more mental power, a puzzle to figure out, a character to role play with, a little bit more of the sort of theatrical aspect of it. Then, yes, some sort of setback. Maybe it's a trap, it's an obstacle. Again, like I said earlier, you're just throwing obstacles in their way. That is actually a large part of what the game is about. Just obstacles, they figure it out. Next obstacle, figure it out. You know, the thing as a game master is just trying to make sure that these obstacles don't feel like the same thing each time. You know, it's not just the same goblin running out, or you know, or the same pit in the floor. You know, you're just mixing it up. Then, yeah, your boss fight, the climax. So while the first bit was a smaller fight to soften up the characters, then whatever monster you've got going on that week is going to come out toward the end. And then at the end, yeah, the reward, which may potentially be a twist that ties into whatever the next episode is going to be. And yeah, it's a pretty simple formula. So, and well, I saw you took a picture, it's great. But if you ever just forget what it is, just type in 5-room dungeon and you will find a lot of resources and materials for this. Some other ones that are in more detail as well. So if you're doing something that's more like a detective mystery, there's a version of that as well. And it's actually very successful. Because like I said, you just kind of change up what the obstacles are. Now that, plus the fact that the players are going to take it in innumerable directions that you didn't anticipate in the first place. Sorry, forgive me for like jumping back and forth. Big advice to you as dungeon masters and game masters, as you probably sensed already, don't feel the need to be in control of everything. Your ability to pivot and improvise is gonna, well, first of all, keep you sane. And secondly, make for a better adventure for your players. A term, well, actually, let's see who in the room is familiar with the role-playing term of railroading. Yeah, you may have heard that. Generally, although it's kind of ironic because players will complain about being railroaded, but then they're waiting around for the train to arrive. So there's a fine balance in between. Well, for those at home or those who aren't familiar with railroading, it is the term that is used where the dungeon master or game master is maybe asserting too much control. So like a player wants to do something and then the game master's like, no, you can't, or no, or they'll find a way to really force things in the direction that they want them to go in. And generally this gets resentment from players because you've just taken away all their agency. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, you know, this is a collective storytelling. Everyone's got some degree of agency, although to get to that one player who maybe asserts more of their agency, that's kind of not fair on other players because, you know, everybody's here to be enjoying the game. It's not just one person that we're facilitating. So railroading, by the way, the opposite of railroading, you may have heard the, oh gosh, I'm blanking. I'll come back to that later. Sandbox, that was the term I was looking for. Sandbox is considered the opposite, where it's very kind of, you've created this sandbox of a universe and they can explore in different directions. I believe the term is also used in video gaming now as well. So very wide open. So yeah, it's getting back to not feeling the need to be in control of everything. Improvising, I mean, the whole thing is improvised. So, like I said, it kind of improvised, but at the same time, with a little bit of a poker face, like you intended it to go that way. That's a good way to go.
Quick question.
Yeah.
For players that, well, how do you feel about metagame? Players that metagame, they let everyone know what everything is going on at all the time, and then kind of helps them dictate what they should be doing at that point, when it should be their imagination running their character versus this one person saying, you should do this because this is the best way to do it.
It's almost metagaming, I was going to say, is like if a character were to step out of character and look at the script, like they've got knowledge that their character shouldn't have, which I believe didn't that happen in Robin Hood Men in Tights, where the sheriff gets the script, and so that would be kind of like metagaming. So yeah, they're using knowledge that the character wouldn't have. Gosh, how do I feel about it? I mean, I encourage it not to. In fact, if somebody were to do that, and I'd be like, yeah, but your character doesn't know that, do they? I mean, there are many different types of players, and I think the ones who are more likely to metagame are players who like winning. Like, D&D is a game to win, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to defeat everybody, but whatever it is that is the optimal thing that you're going to get out of it, you're going and I think that might lead to metagaming, because if you're out to win, you're going to use whatever resources you have. I'm more inclined for like role playing, and as I mentioned, the story to me is the most effective thing. Did we create a story, like a piece of theater almost? And like to me, that's the success, and also the interaction and joy. But that's not that's my preference. Like I said, some different type of gamers. You've also got some role-playing gamers who don't care about rolling dice. They don't care about winning the gold. But if they get to do their accent and flesh out the history of this character, so you're very, very thespian in that sense. So I think, understanding that, different people are trying to get different things out of it. And I mean, again, so you might even have a table of people who are being tactical. And 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons, which some people love to hate, was a much more tactical game. And so it did have a little bit more of that metagaming of like stepping out of character and thinking tactics based on the board and so forth. And I think, really, you just got to go on a table-by-table basis, because if you've got a table full of people who are loving that, then it's not for me to say you can't. I just know that the tables when it feels good, when the table's really flowing, to me those tables are the ones where the story is going, people are in character, there is just this natural, spontaneous reaction that seems to happen. When somebody does something or says something that it just happens spontaneously. There's something kind of quite magical about that, and I don't know if it's something primordial, like our caveman days of being around the fire, telling stories. But I think there is definitely something that we get as humans when we're around the table, and that moment kicks in. So yes, actually, well, it was mentioned earlier that I have a steampunk show, and if anyone's interested, that is actually going to be next year, but I was not going to talk much about that. Let's continue talking about Dungeons and Dragons, because we do have a few minutes left. Do we have any questions?
Have them online, yeah.
Oh, okay. But I can sense there are questions here.
So I was kind of thinking about, you like, I understand that, like, the story should sort of flow however, like, the table makes it flow. But you do have to, like, have some sort of preparation, and I don't have, like, a good feel for, like, how far in the future of the story I should try to prepare when I'm trying to, like, get things organized. So is there, like, a kind of a general sense that you...
Actually, yeah, a lot of the best advice I've heard is just the next session. Like, don't go too far. Well, first of all, this is the sad detail. You know, if you plan out, I don't know, 10 sessions ahead, the game might fizzle out before that, which, you know, is a sad thing. We don't want that to happen. But, you know, you've gone ahead and you did all this, you know, years worth of planning, and then the game ran for 2 months. The other thing about only planning out one session ahead is, again, that kind of pivoting, that sort of improvisation. Sometimes something will happen in that game, and you're like, okay, I can use this in the next one. And some of the best moments can come from that. Also, I guess along these lines, and I hadn't mentioned this earlier, characters or players, you know, love to do their backstory. And as a GM, the more you can know about the backstory and kind of notes and everything else, and then maybe, like, yeah, next session, incorporate something. Players love it when the story suddenly has something to do with, you know, like they talk about this long lost brother, and then he shows up like in the next session or something. Or, you know, you find out that he's a prisoner somewhere, and then suddenly, you know, they've become much more invested because of that. So basically, yeah, one session. My favorite YouTube DMs and their advice, they're pretty consistent in the, yeah, like one session out. Because it kind of, yeah, keeps it fresh, keeps you able to pivot, and then also you're not going to end up wasting your time planning a bunch of stuff. You know, was it Winston Churchill who said, was it no plan survives contact with the enemy? Well, in many ways, it's true with like Dungeons and Dragons. You know, you've got a bunch of stuff planned. A huge amount of this is not going to end up going the way you thought it was. So being able to pivot and improvise is huge. Like I said, I think it's going to increase your fun. It's going to take a lot of that pressure off. And the main thing too is just keep that poker face and act like that's what you meant to do all along.
How do you make a twist?
A twist? Oh, as in like the end? Well, in a way it's kind of a bit cruel because you're kind of snatching the victory away. So think about, oh, well, here's the classic. Super Mario Brothers? Is it, you know, when you rescue Princess Peach and then suddenly she's snatched away? I mean, that's an example of a twist. When, yeah, there is some victory, but it's kind of a bit brief because the thing, the object you were trying to find, it's not actually the right one, or yeah, it gets snatched away, or you know, somebody ends up getting kidnapped or something. It's basically it's your cliffhanger. It's, you know, something that could go into the, you know, keep them wanting more. I felt like it was a pretty fun one. Fun one. The middle school, our last session before summer break, and they thought they'd defeated the bad guy, and then he sort of swoops in, took one of the player characters, swished him through this portal. And so now they are spending the entire summer vacation wondering what happened to this one player. And you know that as soon as school starts back in August, well, D&D Club will start in September, that now the quest to rescue the person, that is, so like they've been thinking, hopefully they've been thinking about this over the summer. So yeah, a twist, could be a number of things, you know. I guess maybe don't be too cruel. Because if you're too cruel, then, you know, your players might resent you. And actually that's, a big thing too about being a dungeon master or game master is that sort of contract of trust between the players. Some dungeon masters are very adversarial and like it's, you know, us and them and everything else. And generally, well, to me that sounds really tiring. But also then the players will not trust you. And then also the players will start doing things where the dungeon master won't trust them. And if there's not trust at the table, then that ability to connect with the story collectively is less likely to happen because everybody's in a sort of defensive posture. And it takes, I mean, anybody who's done any kind of theater, trust exercises are usually, one of the first things you do because there's a certain vulnerability, when you're putting yourself out there, telling a story, using your imagination, playing a character. You have to trust the people at the table that they're not going to make fun of you because, if you start doing silly voices, it's very easy to make fun of somebody doing that. But if you're at a table where you trust everybody around the table, things will just start coming out and people have fun with it. And like I said, that is kind of the main thing is, it's supposed to be fun. All right. Well, much to my surprise, we've actually gone the full hour. I was kind of worried I would run out of things to talk about, but thank you very much for helping me out with, input and questions and so forth. And I hope some of this has been useful. Like I said, it's just kind of me rambling on about some of the things that have been useful to me and hopefully, to pass on. And I guess the main thing is, if you're thinking about running a game, whatever you can do to take the pressure off yourself and, give yourself a pass because, you don't have to be this expert on everything. In fact, sometimes it's better when you're not. And certainly, hopefully, you'll have a group of people who will be grateful that you're running a game. And then at some point, they'll see that it can be done, and maybe they'll run a game, and you get to be a player in theirs, because those are good tables too, where you actually have a rotation of people running the game. So, all right, I believe we are almost out of time. So thank you very much for